Hello, I'm James Ezimohan. You're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. President Trump threatens a massive attack against Iran as oil prices pass $100 a barrel. The US targets dozens of key trading partners with a new wave of tariffs. And Pakistan hits back at claims it's dragged its heels on reforms as its trade deal with the EU comes under scrutiny. US President Donald Trump says he is considering what he calls a massive attack on Iran, with some of the biggest strikes seen in the conflict so far. It comes after Trump warned that the US would hold the Iranian regime responsible for Houthi strikes on shipping in the Red Sea. Here's more.
The United States has carried out a 13th straight night of strikes on Iran, according to US Central Command. President Donald Trump recently announced an increase in military action and said more US service members had been killed. On Thursday, Trump warned Iran and its Houthi allies of what he called major military punishment. The warning came after Houthi fighters attacked 2 Saudi oil tankers in the Red Sea, threatening another major shipping route in the Middle East. The growing conflict pushed Brent crude oil above $100 a barrel for the first time since May, with markets reacting to fears of a disruption to global energy supplies. Trump also said the United States would use Iranian money under Washington's control to pay for any damage caused to ships and cargo. Iran's foreign minister on Friday said if one country can confiscate another's assets, it creates, quote, an incendiary precedent. Meanwhile, Iran's health ministry said US airstrikes since June 27th have killed 53 people and injured 592 others. Officials said more than 500 of the injured have been discharged from hospital, while 36 remain under treatment. Eyewitness video from the Shalamcheh border crossing with Iraq showed fires and damaged buildings after what Iranian officials described as a US missile strike. Iranian state media reported 2 people were killed and 11 others were wounded. Iran's military also said it launched new drone attacks on 3 US military bases in Kuwait, targeting ammunition depots, fuel storage sites, and military supplies.
The World Bank says a prolonged conflict between the United States and Iran could hit global growth. It warns the economic fallout of the fighting could drive up prices and increase pressure on indebted countries.
The worsening conflict between the United States and Iran has brought the World Bank's worst-case global economic scenario close to becoming reality. The bank's chief economist, Indamit Gill, says if hostilities continue for 6 months or more, global economic growth could slow to just 1.3% this year as inflation and interest rates rise. During a media interview on Wednesday, Gill said the World Bank's June economic forecast modeled 3 scenarios because of the high level of uncertainty surrounding the conflict. He said the worst-case scenario has already come close to materializing. Under that scenario, global headline inflation would reach 4.5% this year. Gill also warned that damage to oil infrastructure in the Middle East could disrupt the transport of fertilizers, helium, and sulfur, key inputs for agriculture. He said that could worsen food insecurity and trigger a chain reaction across the global economy. He added that once inflation accelerates, heavily indebted countries could face severe debt servicing problems within months. In its June Global Economic Prospects report, the World Bank forecast global growth would slow from 2.9% in 2025 to 2.5% in 2026. But it cautioned that if the conflict between the United States and Iran deteriorates further, global growth could slide to 1.3%.
Joining us now from London is Ricardo Evangelista, financial market analyst at Active Trades. Good to have you, Ricardo.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Now, the 1.3% figure is a worst-case scenario. Are markets taking that risk seriously enough?
Look, no, that is the short answer. I think if you look at the markets currently, we are not seeing the reflection of such a scenario. So energy prices are still far from they would be if we are to assume that this conflict will last for another 2 months and stay at the current level, which means that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and there's also the other complexity of the Red Sea passage for Saudi oil also now being under threat. So that's not being priced in by the markets. If we look at stock markets, also there have been some losses, but that is more driven by a slowdown in demand for tech-related stocks. So I wouldn't say that the markets are anticipating that. And in particular, if we look at expectations for interest rates, in particular in the United States, which are the barometer for global traders, at the moment, markets are pricing in only one interest rate hike before the end of the year. So in a scenario, the worst case scenario, where this conflict remains at an elevated stage of friction between the parts for a prolonged period of time, we would expect the impact on inflation to be quite substantial, and we would expect that scenario to force central banks, in particular the Fed, to hike interest rates more than just 25 basis points before the end of the year. So the long answer to your question was this, and I don't think that the markets are yet pricing in the worst case scenario.
Now, that said, is the bigger threat the price of oil or how long it stays high?
I think it's a combination of the two. So a short spike in the price of oil and the price of energy in general can raise the anxiety levels, but if it is short-lived, obviously it will not have a massive impact in future deliveries. If we are talking about a small increase in the price of the barrel that lasts for a very long time, a small increase will also have a limited impact. So what has a compounded effect here is the mix of substantially elevated energy costs. So if we look at the pre-conflict levels, the barrel of Brent was trading under $60. And now it's yesterday it touched $100 again. So this is a very substantial increase in the price. And we are seeing that if this price remains elevated for a prolonged period, then the impact will be felt strongly. So it's a combination of the two.
Now, speaking about that combination, markets have remained fairly calm. Is that confidence or complacency?
Yes, it's an interesting point. I think that we are experiencing a period where financial markets, stock markets in particular, are more driven by very specific data points. So the performance of the big tech companies, for example, but also expectations for investment in infrastructure for AI. It's another important data point. And investors seem to be almost isolated from the wider reality and are focusing on more specific data points. So in that sense, we can say that there is no complacency, but the financial markets at the moment are there's too much information coming from these data points I mentioned, and it just seems to block everything out for the time being. So a scenario of global economic slowdown, and a very significant one, is definitely not being priced by the markets at the moment. It doesn't mean that this won't change as we head towards the end of the year. And as you mentioned earlier in the piece there, the worst case scenario materializes, then we are likely to see some impact, some reality-based impact on the performance of financial markets. But for the time being, traders seem to be very much focused on specific data points and are canceling everything else out as noise.
Now, Ricardo, let's take this to the ordinary people. How long before higher energy costs begin to hit household bills? And also, could disruptions to fertilizer supplies turn this into a food price crisis?
Yes, definitely. I think there's different angles from where this will hurt Main Street, so everyday people. You talked about there that higher food prices because of scarcity of fertilizers. That region is a producer and exporter of fertilizers, and therefore prices will increase as supply dwindles. At the same time, we know that with prices rising, central banks are forced to raise borrowing costs. By raising borrowing costs, the debt service of many countries will also increase as a result. Countries will spend less on things like education, healthcare, etc. That will have an impact on the economy, will hurt jobs. With fuel prices going up, everything else goes up as well. So the cost of living, which is already a problem and a concern for most governments in the world, and particularly in the Western world, is the most talked about point in the political discourse. That is likely to increase if that crisis in that region isn't resolved.
Now, finally, Ricardo, if inflation rises again, do central banks protect growth or raise interest rates?
Well, that is the eternal struggle that central banks face. So if you look, for example, at the Federal Reserve, the mandate is a dual mandate. So on one hand, to keep inflation as close as possible to 2%, and on the other hand, to ensure the stability of the labor market. So to ensure that there is economic growth. I think that at this stage, the main focus, at least for the Federal Reserve and for the ECB, lies on guaranteeing price stability, so controlling inflation. We've had a period in the recent past, just after the COVID crisis, where central banks adopted a stance that was quite bearish and said that the inflation that was starting back then would only be a transitory problem. In reality, it was not transitory, and inflation touched 10% in Europe, for example. So I think that central banks are now very cautious about guaranteeing price stability. And for the time being, the main focus remains on controlling inflation. Also because growth is still not giving policymakers sufficient reasons to be a serious concern. We saw yesterday in the US, for example, that employment data came out and new jobless claims hit last month a 57-year low. So I think growth is still okay, and the focus will remain on controlling inflation. So we are likely to see multiple interest rate hikes on both sides of the Atlantic.
That was Ricardo Evangelista, financial market analyst, joining us from London. Thank you for your time, sir.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, the US is targeting dozens of its key trading partners with new wave of tariffs. Duties are to be imposed on almost all US imports to countries, including China, the UK, and most of major countries in the EU.
The Trump administration will impose new tariffs of 10% or 12.5% on goods from 60 trading partners, including the European Union, starting Friday. The new measures come as a temporary 10% global tariff expires. The White House says the measure targets countries it believes have not done enough to stop goods made with forced labor from entering global supply chains. The move is seen as Trump's effort to restore broad tariffs after the US Supreme Court ruled in February that earlier reciprocal tariffs could not be enforced using emergency powers. According to official documents, The new tariffs will apply to about 99% of US imports. However, several products, including oil and gas, fertilizer, and some food items, are exempt. The announcement has triggered criticism from several trading partners. The European Union Foreign Policy Chief, Kaja Kallas, says the bloc's labour standards do not support US claims.
What I've heard also, the argumentation behind that it's forced labour, sorry, but you can't say that for European Union. If you compare our labour laws to the ones of United States, people have paid vacations, we have very good conditions, labour conditions for our employees, so it's not really grounded.
France's Commerce Minister says France remains, quote, fully mobilised to defend our interests. The Bank of France governor also warned the tariffs could create more uncertainty for global trade and weigh on economic growth. Britain, meanwhile, said the new tariffs would have no negative impact on UK businesses. Australia and Brazil described the measures as unjustified, saying they will seek to have them removed. Malaysia said it was relieved its tariff rate was relatively lower compared to other countries, but pledged to continue negotiations with Washington. Chile and the Philippines also defended their labour standards, saying they remain committed to preventing forced labour while maintaining stable trade ties with the United States.
A Russian ballistic missile strike on the Kyiv region has killed at least 10 people and left about 100 others injured. The assault comes amid an intense exchange of fire, with Ukrainian forces retaliating by hitting a commercial depot near St. Petersburg.
A Russian ballistic missile strike on the Kyiv region has killed at least 10 people and injured around 100 others. A Ukrainian drone attack has hit logistics centers belonging to Russia's largest online retailer, Wildberries, in St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region. Authorities say 3 people were injured after a fire broke out at one of the centers. Wildberries said it has suspended operations at 2 logistics centers, while staff at a warehouse in Crimea have been evacuated. Kyiv has previously accused the retailer of handling Russian military supplies. Moscow has denied the accusation. Meanwhile, Ukraine said it used its own Flamingo missiles to strike a defense plant in Russia's Kirov region. The sanctioned company makes guided anti-aircraft missiles and other military hardware, according to Ukrainian officials. President Volodymyr Zelensky also announced an attack on a Russian oil facility more than 1,300 kilometers from Ukrainian soil. However, he did not give details. Separately, Russia said its forces carried out overnight strikes on the Ukrainian ports of Odessa, Izmail and Mykolaiv. It says it was infrastructure that supports Kyiv's armed forces. The latest exchange comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he is likely to travel to the United States next week for a meeting with President Donald Trump, and that a trilateral meeting, including Russia, should take place before autumn. US and Russian diplomats discussed the war in Ukraine at the ASEAN meeting in the Philippines on Thursday. During the gathering, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov reaffirmed readiness for a political and diplomatic settlement to the Russia-Ukraine war.
The European Union has adopted its 21st sanctions package against Russia, with top diplomats calling it the toughest set of penalties in 4 years. The EU's grip on everything from Moscow's shadow oil fleet to its cyber espionage operations is being tightened. Here's more.
The European Union has adopted its 21st sanctions package against Russia. It is the most extensive list of penalties enacted in 4 years, and it casts a wide net across critical sectors. In the area of finance, the EU is tightening restrictions on the Moscow exchange and blocking the A7 cross-border payment network. It's also explicitly banning crypto services operating in third countries that help Moscow evade sanctions. Beyond the financial sector, This new sanctions package directly targets Russia's military, cutting the supply chain for long-range drones and adding 51 entities to the export control list. In the cyber warfare sector, a first. The EU is directly holding Russia's notorious FSB 16th Centre accountable for cyber espionage and sabotage across member states. And on human rights, the package freezes the assets of 15 individuals and one entity linked to war crimes and the torture of Ukrainian prisoners of war. While those sectors face strict bans, the core economic battleground remains energy. The EU is locking in a new price cap on Russian oil at $44 a barrel for the next 12 months. Look at the numbers. The global market price for a barrel of crude sits near $80. The original 2022 price cap was $60. By forcing the ceiling down to $44, Brussels aims to sharply cut Moscow's primary revenue stream. To enforce this, the EU has blacklisted more tankers operating in Russia's shadow fleet, targeting vessels that transport oil outside the radar. However, passing a sanctions package requires unanimous consent from all member states. Consensus requires concessions. The final document includes significant carve-outs designed to protect domestic economies. Greece secured an exemption, allowing its shipping fleet to transport Russian LNG to non-EU countries. Following pressure from Bulgaria, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church and the founder of Lukoil were removed from the blacklist. Portugal and Germany blocked a proposed ban on Russian seafood imports. And Austria delayed sanctions against an investment firm linked to Raiffeisen Bank, a company that is currently exposed to over €2 billion in losses in Russia. The 21st package tightens the financial grip on Moscow, but the final draft reflects a complex balancing act, maintaining a united European front while protecting domestic economies.
Now, two Kazakhstan-based companies have been sanctioned by the European Union over alleged links to Russia's supply chains. The EU's 21st package targets Russia's energy, financial and defense sectors, while tightening restrictions on companies accused of helping Moscow bypass existing measures. It also includes firms based in Kyrgyzstan, Turkey, the UAE, India, and China. Now, Pakistan is pushing against the European Union's latest assessment of its preferential trade status with the bloc. Islamabad says the report overlooks years of reforms to the agreement. The dispute comes as Pakistan also faces new pressure over its trading relationship with the US. Miriam Zia has more.
Pakistan on Thursday rejected the EU's latest assessment of the country's preferential status under a trade scheme known as GSP+. GSP Plus grants zero import tax on most goods from developing countries, as long as they adhere conventions on labor, human rights, and other practices. Pakistan is the largest beneficiary of the incentive. The EU is Pakistan's biggest export market, accounting for more than a quarter of exports. The latest assessment is based on a report by the European Commission that was published on the 17th of July. It acknowledges Pakistan's progress on prison reforms, anti-torture measures, labor rights, and human rights institutions. But it raises concerns over other matters, such as litigation against journalists, freedom of expression, enforced disappearances, and the detention and trial of opposition leaders. The report says legislative reforms must now translate into improvements on the ground. Pakistan's Foreign Office spokesman said the report understates the reforms the country has made since it joined the scheme in 2014. He said it gives disproportionate attention to areas where progress has been slower. The exchange comes as the United States has just imposed 10 to 12.5% tariffs on Pakistani imports over forced labor concern, adding to the international scrutiny of Pakistan's human rights and labor standards. Mariam Sia, A News, Islamabad.
We'll be back after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Now, Iran and Iraq have agreed to deepen economic partnership and security ties after bilateral talks in Tehran. Turaj Shiralelu has more.
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Iraqi Prime Minister Ali al-Zaidi have signed a comprehensive memorandum of understanding to promote bilateral trade. 4 other deals were also signed by both sides on road transportation and administrative matters. They agreed to build a railway between Khosravi and Baghdad, and a sister city agreement between Tehran and Baghdad was also concluded during the visit. According to President's office, Pezeshkian said developing rail and road network links with Iraq is one of Iran's priorities. He said it would pave the way toward more investment, common markets, and port development. He highlighted that security along Iran and Iraq's shared border was key to facilitating trade and transit links. Al-Zaidi welcomed enhanced trade ties and praised Tehran's political and practical support to Iraq in the fight against terrorism. The Iraqi Prime Minister said Baghdad will not tolerate any hostile activity from its soil against Iran and is committed to security agreements with its neighbor as it continues to battle some terrorist elements. On the sidelines of the visit, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told reporters that he was optimistic about the positive outcome of the agreements signed on Thursday. When asked whether the Iraqi Prime Minister had a message for Iranian officials following his visit to Washington last week, Araghchi said Tehran has no problem with Iraq's mediation. But the main obstacle that remains is what he called America's irrational and excessive approach. Rashid Alilu from Tehran for A News.
Now let's talk to Al-Abbas Al-Sudani, geopolitics analyst, join us from London. Good to have you, sir.
Hey, thank you for having me here.
Now let's start by getting your thoughts on the timing. Why did Iraq's Prime Minister travel to Tehran so soon after meeting President Trump in Washington?
Well, first of all, these two visits for Washington last week and for Tehran yesterday had an economic dominant theme. Iraq now domestically is prioritizing economy. The Prime Minister himself is a businessman who came to the position from outside the system, the political parties, and he has this economical theme on his profile. However, the visits themselves are not only economically oriented, but what you raised the question, it's more about the situation in the region. So Iraq now is being pushed to play the role of a mediator, and Iraq is obviously not a very typical mediator as Pakistan, Qatar, or the others, because of 3 reasons. Firstly, the geopolitical position of Iraq as a buffer state between Israel and Iran. Secondly, the bilateral relations of Iraq with both countries, Iran and the US. Thirdly, the importance of Iraq economy as a trade center and as a contributor. And we literally know that US bases are in Iraq and Iranian pro groups are in Iraq. So Iraq is different from that. As far as I've been as far as I know, and as far as I can say, Iraq was offered the role as a mediator when he met Trump. However, that does not mean pushing Qatar and Pakistan outside. And I believe that Iraq will play the role of mediator in terms of economy with Iran. The nuclear file will stay under the rule of, like, the mediation rule of Pakistan and Qatar.
Now, Iraq and Iran have agreed on new road and rail links. How significant could those projects be for trade across the wider region?
They are very significant. And you know, the whole world now is looking toward diversifying the trade canals, the trade routes, because of what I call Hormuz dilemma. There is literally now something could be called Hormuz dilemma from the American sides. If the American compromises with Iran, they will lose their reputation. If they don't and they go farther for escalating the situation in the Middle East, they will lose their dominant, and they will start a forever war, and this is not in their favor. So the whole world have learned the lesson, and they now are seeking to diverse the routes. Iran itself is seeking to diverse. Iran, which is the entity that controlling Hormuz Strait, is seeking to diverse their routes. And these routes, from even the agreements on Shalamcha in south of Iraq and so on, that will give Iraq the ability to position itself as a new level of trade center. And even the agreements that happened with the United States, the 48 or 40-ish agreements, including economical and the trade routes from Iraq to Syria to the Mediterranean, and that can also link Iran to the Mediterranean, diverging the choke points, and not only seeing Hormuz as the choke point that control 30% of the global market. However, this cooperation, there were 4 agreements were signed between Iraq and Iran, but I would really say that that visit for Zaidi to Iran wasn't completely about these 4 agreements, but it was about the economical ties of Iraq as an economical, and again I'm emphasize on that, Iraq will play the economical mediator role between the United States and Iran, and these projects are just some public features, but underneath there are this economical mediation rule.
Now let's talk about security for a second. Al-Zaidi says Iraq won't allow its territory to be used against Iran. Can Baghdad honor that pledge while also trying to disarm Iran-backed groups at home?
Very great point, and I would add to that, Al-Zaidi himself said as well that Iraq will not allow the Iranian pro group to attack or to target for example, U.S. embassy or U.S. bases or so on. I would say that Zaidi is buying time here. Let's not forget that Zaidi has a deadline, the 30th of September, for the global coalition and the American army to be withdrawn from Iraq. And it's the same deadline to disarm the Iranian pro-Iranian militia groups. And for now, if we look at Zaidi position and the Zaidi strategy, he's following this kind of balancing strategy. So he's buying time. I believe that these pro-Iranian groups would, to some extent, commit to a Zaidi agreement because of 2 things. Firstly, they are not as powerful as before. Half of them were politicized, and half of them now understand the political language. The second half of them are trying to seek the Iranian goals, and I would say again, the Iranian goal is to talk to the American. However, they are bluffing. They jumped from coercive bargaining to coercive diplomacy to situated coercive diplomacy, and now to coercive settlement, if I might put it like this in game theory. So I believe these groups would try to commit to the prime minister decision. And on the other hand, I believe the US would comment as well to the prime minister decision. Specifically, we saw the chemistry, the high-level chemistry between Zaidi and Trump, and Trump liked Zaidi. Typical Trump, he was so clear about that. He gave him a hat as a gift. He arranged a lunch outside the agenda with him. So I would say Zaidi is playing this two-edge. So it is a two-edged sword. I'm not saying it does not have any risk, but it is the best positioning for Iraq now till 30th of September.
All right. Thank you. That was Al Abbas Al Sudani, geopolitics analyst, joining us from London. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Now, India's government says it needs more time to respond to demands for the education minister to resign after talks with the leaders of the youth-based cockroach movement. Student leaders are standing firm on their demands for education chief Dharmendra Pradhan to stand down. The leaking of university exam papers in May has seen over 2 million students facing a retest in highly competitive application to India's top medical schools. Friday's meeting comes after one of the chief activists in the movement ended a 26-day hunger strike, citing a threat of possible violence in the streets. Now, India has been named as one of the potential suppliers of defense goods to Armenia. New figures show a rise in flights carrying military cargo from India to the Caucasus in recent months.
As Baku continues to advance its peace agenda with Armenia and take concrete steps towards lasting stability, new figures are raising questions over Yerevan's military procurement. According to data obtained by Minval Politica, from what it describes as reliable sources, the number of flights transporting military cargo from India to Armenia increased tenfold between April and June, compared with the same period last year. The report says Armenia received 18 flights by military aircraft or civilian planes capable of carrying military cargo during that period. 4 of those flights reportedly came from Russia. Looking at the first 6 months of the year, the report says Armenia received at least 37 such flights in total, 15 from India, 13 from Russia, 4 from Iran, 2 from Belgium, and 1 each from Germany, the UAE and the Netherlands. According to the report, 23 of those 39 flights passed through Iranian airspace. It says the flights were carried out by Armenian Air Force 1 Noel 76 TD transport aircraft. The figures come as Yerevan continues to publicly emphasize its commitment to peace, raising questions over the scale of military cargo being transported to Armenia. Azerbaijan has repeatedly called for a lasting peace agreement with Armenia, while stressing the importance of transparency, confidence-building measures and genuine steps towards regional stability. The Armenian government has not commented on the claims yet.
A nationwide power outage has left millions of homes across Georgia without power overnight on Thursday. Authorities say supplies have now been restored, while the cause of the disruption is under investigation. Here's more.
Just after midnight Thursday into Friday, electricity was cut off across all of Georgia. The nationwide outage affected Tbilisi, Batumi, Kutaisi, Zugdidi, Tel Aviv, and every other major city and region simultaneously. The Georgian state electric system says its workers began restoration efforts as soon as it happened, while the cause of the outage was being investigated. One theory that circulated widely pointed to the high-voltage transmission line connecting Georgia and Turkey. The 700 megawatt interconnector is in active use as part of a seasonal power exchange agreement between the two countries. However, authorities pushed back on unverified claims, urging media outlets to rely only on official statements and refrain from spreading misinformation while the situation is under investigation. The outage also disrupted water services. Georgian Water and Power reported that pumping stations automatically shut down when the power failed, leading to reduced water pressure or supply interruptions in those areas. Power restoration work continued through the night in stages, with power returning first to the Mtskheta-Mtianeti region and large parts of Tbilisi. By morning, the Georgian state electric system confirmed that electricity has been fully restored across the entire country. Officials say the exact cause of the incident is still being determined and further details are expected to be released to the public. Nini Nikolaishvili, Batumi, A News.
Now, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is moving closer to its annual Leaders Summit, with foreign ministers meeting in Kyrgyzstan to finalize the agenda and prepare a series of key decisions. The talks focus on the bloc's future expansion, regional security, and closer cooperation among member states. Farza Kalamoziner has more.
17 countries could soon receive a unified partner status within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in what could become one of the bloc's most significant institutional reforms in recent years. Meeting in Cholponata on Friday, foreign ministers approved the proposal as they finalized preparations for next month's SCO Leaders Summit in Bishkek. They also approved the package of documents for the Bishkek Declaration and signed 8 agreements aimed at expanding cooperation among member states. Regional security was a key focus of the talks. Leaders are expected to consider establishing a universal center to counter emerging challenges, alongside a separate center to combat drug trafficking. Kyrgyz President Sadyr Japarov called for the faster establishment of the new security center, saying terrorism, extremism, drug trafficking and transnational organized crime continue to adapt to new conditions. He said that today's security challenges have political, economic, technological, environmental and humanitarian dimensions, and that no country can tackle them alone. Japarov also called for expanding trade and economic cooperation, improving transport connectivity and promoting joint investment projects across the region. The proposals agreed by foreign ministers will now go before SCO leaders at the summit in Bishkek on August 31st and September 1st, where they are expected to adopt the Bishkek Declaration and other key decisions marking the organization's 25th anniversary. Farisa Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Now, 5 people have been killed in a shooting incident in the occupied West Bank, according to Israeli and Palestinian officials. The Israeli military said a Palestinian seized a weapon from local security personnel and opened fire on a group of Israeli civilians who were hiking near Nablus. 1 Israeli was killed. Palestinian officials, however, said Israeli civilians and soldiers opened fire on residents from the nearby town of Tal, leaving 4 Palestinians dead and 4 others wounded. Israeli forces have since sealed off the area and launched a search for those involved. All right, after the break, the UK's Prime Minister opens a new government base in Manchester as he pledges to move more decision-making away from Westminster. Welcome back to A News. Now, UK Prime Minister is putting his devolution agenda into action, opening a new government base in the northern city of Manchester. The move reflects Andy Burnham's long-standing push to shift power from Westminster to cities and regions. The former Greater Manchester mayor is expected to work from what's been called Number 10 North every week while he is in office. He'll also chair the first meeting of a revived National Economic Council for Manchester, examining plans to boost the UK's regional economy.
It will be the situation room for growth, where we all get around the table, mayors with all of the team and the Whitehall department, so we get those decisions made more quickly, we break through the logjams and we get things done. So it is much more profound, I think, than people have worked out so far. It's not just a new office.
More than 450 executives are gathering for the Global Business Forum in Tashkent, aimed at boosting investment in Uzbekistan. Severa Rajapova has more.
Freshov attracted a record $4.3 billion in foreign investment and loans during the first half of this year. Tashkent is making another push to put itself on the map as Central Asia's top destination for international businesses. More than 450 executives, investors and industry experts from over 45 countries have descended on the capital for the Global Business Services Forum. Discussions are focused on outsourcing, digital services, artificial intelligence and business expansion.
Uzbekistan has $43 billion of foreign FDIs, foreign direct investment, and it happened last year in 2025, and 80% of those came across the investment into the energetics, into IT infrastructure, etc. So I think that the biggest turning point here is that Uzbekistan is today providing a really business-friendly environment where you can invest with lower risk. We also have a corporate investment law that guarantees that the foreign investors may be defended against the other invasions toward the business. That's why I think business-friendly laws and the environment that allows them to invest freely.
The event comes as Tashkent continues to outperform the rest of Uzbekistan's economy. During the first 6 months of this year, the capital recorded 13.3% economic growth, launched around 250 investment projects, and created nearly 10,000 jobs.
And one of the areas that we're addressing and looking at is the whole data protection side. So data protection and cloud infrastructure, so cloud storage and, you know, data privacy, those types of issues are the areas where, you know, particularly when you're dealing with tech companies as we are, service companies as we are, you know, that flow of data, that protection of data. So it's not to take away the protections, but it's to build an element of flexibility on top of the protections. That's a whole area that there's work to be done.
Uzbekistan was on our mind for a lot many years. So BPO businesses have been moving places. So and of late, Uzbekistan was on the map. So that's where it came into picture. Whereas there are also a few data center businesses which are trying to expand into the Central Asia, where Tashkent and Uzbekistan is on center of their businesses as well. So that made us to think about it, and very well, here we are.
Officials say Uzbekistan is paving economic growth with one of the region's most competitive investment environments. IT Park Uzbekistan, the country's tech hub, is now home to more than 3,800 resident companies, including over 1,000 international firms. Investors are being offered a range of incentives, including 0% corporate property, land and social taxes, as well as reduced 7.5% personal income tax for eligible IT Park residents. And business support programs like the Zero Risk Initiative make the country even more attractive as a global investment destination. It is Cyril Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan A News.
Now, Afghanistan is looking to deepen its economic partnership with neighboring Uzbekistan as business leaders from both countries meet at the event in Tashkent. Tamim Bahis has more.
A high-level Afghan business delegation led by Afghanistan's Chamber of Commerce and Investment Chairman Sayyid Karim Hashimi visited Uzbekistan, where a joint Afghanistan-Uzbekistan private sector business forum has been held in the Sirdarya region. The forum brought together a 100-member Afghan delegation, along with hundreds of Uzbek traders, investors and business representatives to discuss ways of expanding bilateral economic cooperation. Addressing the forum, the Sirdarya governor emphasized expanding joint investment, developing new regional transit corridors and improving conditions for trade between Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. For his part, ACCI chairman invited Uzbek investors to take part in joint investment projects in Afghanistan. He also called for regular joint trade exhibitions and the establishment of a joint private sector committee to strengthen business ties. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's Ministry of Mines and Petroleum says several Uzbek investors have expressed interest in investing in the country's mining sector, particularly in lead and zinc mines, as well as setting up a modern mineral processing plant inside Afghanistan. Ministry officials have welcomed the interest and pledged full support for the proposed investments. Adding to the growing economic engagement, Uzbek official statistics show that more than 205,000 Afghan business travelers visited Uzbekistan during the first 6 months of this year, the highest number from any country, highlighting the expanding commercial relationship between the two neighbors. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
All right, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.